and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
She wishes. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The American people have spoken. They overwhelmingly voted for today's U-Cut proposal, calling for U.S. taxpayer funds overpaid to the United Nations to be returned to the United States. The United Nations holds about $179 million overpaid by U.S. taxpayers into the UN Equalization Fund. This is not about the UN finally doing the right thing by paying for security upgrades at its headquarters in New York. The UN is not paying for anything. After years of avoiding its responsibilities, the UN, with the support of the Obama administration, is asking the American taxpayer to bail them out once again and pay 100% of the proposed construction cost. To make matters worse, allowing the UN to take $100 million of the refund owed to U.S. taxpayers would be an increase for the UN budget. This U-Cut not only ensures that U.S. taxpayers receive the funds owed to the U.S. Treasury, but it prevents a $100 million increase for the UN. The UN doesn't want the American people to know this, so the UN and the State Department are now stating that they should allow this increase because it is for security upgrades. This is not about security. This is the UN and the Obama administration looking for another excuse to avoid making the difficult choices and requiring accountability from the United Nations. This is not like U.S. Embassy construction projects, where the needs are assessed, where a detailed plan is developed on how the security needs will be addressed, on how the funding request is presented, and how the Congress will then allocate the funds. No. After months of requests, my colleagues on the committee and I are still waiting for the details on this proposed construction project, and more recently on how the UN would fund it. In news reports, I read that the State Department may have already handed over to the UN $100 million of our overpayment into the TEF. The Tax Equalization Fund, TEF, is a roundabout mechanism premised on the UN belief that UN employees' salaries and benefits should be tax-free. The TEF has collected much more from the UN, from the U.S. than it has paid out. The UN's most recent biennial financial report states that the amount of the U.S. paid surplus has grown to $179 million. The UN readily admits that it does owe the overpaid money to our U.S. taxpayers. According to the UN's official financial report, the TEF surplus is, quote, payable to the United States of America pending instructions as to its disposition, end quote. This U-Cut proposal declares that it is U.S. policy to seek the return of those funds and the reform of the TEF assessment process. And until the Secretary of State certifies to Congress that those funds have been returned, the bill withholds from our UN dues an amount exactly equal to the overpayment identified by the UN. That's the simple question, Madam Speaker, framed by today's vote. Should the $179 million taxpayer dollars, which the UN again admits it has no right to keep, be returned to the United States taxpayers? Should the American people be asked to foot the entire bill for the UN construction project? Since this issue has begun receiving public attention, there has been a great deal of misinformation that I would like to address briefly. Last week, the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizational Affairs reportedly said that, quote, the $179 million in overpayments are in the form of credits, not cash, and thus cannot be refunded per se. Madam Speaker, this is simply not true. Not only does the statement by the IO Assistant Secretary conflict with what the State Department budget professionals have most recently told the Congressional Budget Office, but it conflicts with the UN's own position. They can't even get their story straight. The UN's most recent financial report makes clear that the $179 million surplus is a distinct account payable to the United States of America. So the question is, should the U.S. pay an additional $100 million to the UN? I first raised the TEF surplus issue in a letter to Secretary Clinton in November 18th of last year. The State Department response since that time has been tardy, incomplete, and evasive. At a November 18th briefing, the State Department mentioned for the first time that it was considering whether to allow the UN to spend part of the U.S. surplus on an unrelated construction project at the UN headquarters in New York. Nothing certain. The Foreign Affairs Committee requested detailed plans, cost estimates for the proposed construction project so that we could credibly assess the claimed $100 million price tag. I repeated that request on December 22nd, then on December 29th, then on January 4th, and on January 25th. We're still waiting for those details. Only thing that we have gotten, Madam Speaker, other than a few PowerPoint slides, the only figures we have received is this. Less than a single page of summary totals with no supporting documentation. This is it. The State Department has admitted that this construction proposal, in the words of the Undersecretary for Management, quote, is primarily the responsibility of the United Nations, end quote. But they want to stick the American taxpayers with the bill. I disagree with the State Department, and the American people, they know that we should not be penalized because the UN failed to adequately plan for its own security needs. If the administration wants to fund this project, the State Department should identify cuts to UN programs to offset the cost and then ask Congress to pay for it directly, explicitly, and clearly. Whatever the merits of this proposal, it should not be taken from a refund owed to U.S. taxpayers. My colleagues, let's join together in support of this week's U-Cut. And with that, Madam Speaker, I respectfully reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time.